Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Anna. Today I have a new story for you, called The Pottery Studio. It's about a stressed office worker who discovers an unexpected creative outlet, and learns that sometimes falling apart, quite literally, is just part of the process. As always, just relax and listen, and let's begin. Maya Chen was 31 years old, working as a financial analyst at a large company downtown. Her days were filled with spreadsheets, meetings, and constant deadlines, leaving her mentally exhausted by the time she returned home each evening. Though her career was successful and stable, Maya increasingly felt something important was missing from her life, some creative outlet that had nothing to do with numbers or performance reports. Most evenings, Maya arrived home too tired to do much beyond ordering food and watching television until bedtime. Weekends often disappeared into catching up on sleep or preparing mentally for the following week's workload. She had tried various hobbies over the years, a gym membership she rarely used, an online painting course she abandoned after 2 lessons, a book club she attended only twice before work commitments made regular meetings impossible. Nothing had ever quite stuck, leaving her with a persistent, nagging feeling that she was somehow missing an important piece of her own life. One rainy Saturday afternoon, wandering aimlessly through her neighborhood to escape her empty apartment, Maya passed a small pottery studio she had walked by countless times without ever really noticing. A handwritten sign in the window advertised beginner classes starting the following week. On impulse, something she rarely allowed herself to do, Maya walked inside. The studio smelled earthy and slightly damp, shelves lined with finished ceramic pieces in various colors and shapes, bowls, vases, mugs, and decorative sculptures. Sunlight filtered through large windows onto work tables covered in tools Maya didn't yet recognize, wooden ribs, wire cutters, small sponges, each presumably serving some specific purpose she couldn't begin to guess. A woman with clay-stained hands and a warm smile approached her from a back workroom. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I saw the sign about beginner classes," Maya said, feeling slightly nervous, unsure exactly why she felt drawn to inquire. "I've never done pottery before. Is it okay for complete beginners?" "Absolutely," the woman said, smiling warmly. "I'm Grace, by the way. I've been teaching beginners here for almost 15 years. Everyone who walks through that door starts exactly where you are right now, knowing nothing at all." Maya signed up for the 6-week beginner course on the spot, paying the fee before she could talk herself out of it, surprised by her own spontaneous decision. The following Tuesday evening, Maya arrived at the studio for her first class, feeling oddly nervous, similar to how she remembered feeling on her first day at a new job years earlier. 6 other students had also enrolled, ranging in age from a college student in her early 20s to a retired man in his 60s, all equally uncertain about what to expect. The studio itself felt like a completely different world from Maya's usual sterile office environment. Soft music played quietly in the background, shelves overflowing with works in progress at various stages, some still wet and gray, others dried and waiting for their first firing, a few already glazed in brilliant blues and earthy browns. The retired man, introducing himself as Frank, mentioned he had recently sold his hardware store business and was searching for something meaningful to fill his newly available time. The college student, a quiet young woman named Lily, admitted she needed a creative escape from her demanding engineering coursework. Grace began the class with a brief introduction to the pottery wheel, explaining the basic principles of centering clay before shaping it into anything useful. "Centering is honestly the hardest part for most beginners," Grace explained, demonstrating the technique on her own wheel. "It requires patience and a certain gentleness with the clay, applying steady pressure without forcing it." When it was finally Maya's turn to try the wheel herself, she approached it with unexpected enthusiasm, imagining she would quickly master this new skill. However, the reality proved considerably more challenging than she anticipated. The clay wobbled unevenly on the spinning wheel, refusing to center properly no matter how she adjusted her hands, eventually collapsing into a shapeless, uneven lump. "This is much harder than it looks," Maya admitted, laughing at her own frustration. Clay splattered across her apron and even her cheek. "Everyone says that during their first attempt," Grace reassured her, showing her again, more slowly this time, exactly where to position her hands and how much pressure to apply. Your hands need to learn this feeling. It's not something you can understand just by watching. By the end of the first class, Maya had produced nothing resembling an actual finished piece, just several collapsed attempts at centering clay. Despite this apparent lack of progress, she left the studio feeling strangely satisfied, her mind pleasantly quiet in a way it rarely felt after a typical workday. During the second class, Maya met another beginner named Oliver, a software developer around her own age, who admitted he had signed up partly because his therapist recommended finding a hobby completely unrelated to his stressful, screen-focused job. "I spend all day staring at code," Oliver explained during a break, examining his own lopsided attempt at a small bowl. "I wanted something where my hands actually do the thinking instead of my brain constantly analyzing everything." Maya found herself relating deeply to this sentiment, recognizing the same underlying motivation in her own decision to try pottery. Over the following weeks, she and Oliver quickly became friendly, often working at wheels positioned next to each other, comparing their frequent failures with good-humored camaraderie rather than frustration. They developed a running joke about their respective clay graveyards, referring to the growing collection of collapsed, misshapen attempts each of them accumulated on a shelf near their workstations. "At this rate, I could open a museum of pottery disasters," Oliver joked one evening, holding up a particularly unfortunate lump that vaguely resembled neither a bowl nor a cup nor anything identifiable at all. By the third class, Maya finally managed to properly center a piece of clay for the first time, watching with genuine excitement as it spun smoothly and evenly beneath her steady hands. Grace, noticing her success from across the studio, walked over immediately. "There it is," Grace said, genuinely pleased. "You've got it now. That feeling you just experienced, remember it. Your hands will remember this moment even when your mind forgets exactly what you did differently." Encouraged by this breakthrough, Maya attempted shaping her first actual bowl, carefully pressing her fingers into the centered clay, gradually opening it into a simple, functional shape. Though noticeably imperfect, slightly uneven around the rim, it was recognizably a bowl, her very first successful piece. Frank, working nearby, applauded quietly when he saw it, having struggled himself throughout the entire session without achieving similar success. "I actually made something," Maya said, staring at her creation with genuine pride, an emotion she hadn't experienced this intensely in longer than she cared to admit regarding her actual demanding career. Over the following weeks, Maya's skills gradually improved, though progress remained inconsistent rather than steadily linear. Some evenings, everything seemed to click naturally, her hands moving confidently and producing reasonably attractive pieces. Other evenings, nothing worked correctly at all, clay collapsing repeatedly despite her best efforts, leaving her frustrated and questioning whether she possessed any genuine talent for this demanding craft. During the fourth class, Maya experienced a particularly frustrating evening. Work had been especially demanding that week, an important quarterly report due the following morning, several tense meetings with her manager about missed targets, and barely any sleep the night before. She arrived at the studio already emotionally depleted, hoping the familiar rhythm of the wheel might help her unwind. Instead, after nearly 40 minutes struggling unsuccessfully to shape a simple mug, her clay finally collapsed dramatically, splattering across her apron and the surrounding workspace. Feeling suddenly overwhelmed, tears unexpectedly welled in her eyes, surprising herself with such an intense emotional reaction to something as seemingly trivial as failed pottery. Grace, noticing her distress, approached quietly and sat down beside her workstation. "What's really going on?" Grace asked gently, clearly sensing something deeper than simple pottery frustration. Maya hesitated, then found herself admitting something she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. "I think I'm just tired of failing at things that matter to me," she said quietly. "Work feels like constant failure lately, never quite meeting impossible expectations. I guess I hoped this would be different, something I could just enjoy without that same pressure." Grace nodded understandingly. "Pottery has a funny way of teaching us patience with ourselves," she said. "This clay doesn't care about your work deadlines or anyone else's expectations. It only responds to genuine presence and practice. Maybe that's exactly why you're here, even if you didn't realize it consciously. They sat together quietly for a few minutes, Grace occasionally offering small observations about how differently people related to failure depending on their background and personality, some treating every mistake as valuable information, others, like Maya admitted she often did, treating mistakes as evidence of personal inadequacy. Grace shared that she herself had once quit an entirely different creative pursuit, painting, decades earlier, precisely because she couldn't separate her artistic failures from her sense of self-worth, only rediscovering that same lesson years later through pottery. I actually think that's partly why I became a teacher, Grace admitted. I wanted to help people avoid repeating my own mistake, treating every wobbly bowl like a personal referendum on their worth as a human being. This conversation shifted something meaningful in Maya's perspective. Rather than viewing each failed attempt as evidence of inadequate talent, she began approaching pottery with renewed patience, understanding failure as simply an essential part of the learning process rather than a reflection of her personal worth. By the fifth class, this shift in mindset translated into noticeably improved results. Maya successfully created a small vase with surprisingly elegant proportions, along with 2 matching mugs that Grace specifically praised for their consistent, even walls, a technically challenging aspect many beginners struggled with considerably longer than Maya had. Even Frank, initially the slowest progressing student in the group, managed his own small breakthrough that same evening, finally producing a simple, sturdy bowl after weeks of persistent, good-natured struggle. "You've genuinely improved faster than most beginners I've taught," Grace told her during that 5th session, examining her recent pieces with obvious approval. "Not because you have some special natural talent, but because you've learned to keep trying without punishing yourself for every mistake along the way." As the 6-week beginner course approached its conclusion, Maya found herself feeling genuinely disappointed rather than relieved, having anticipated this creative outlet ending alongside the structured class schedule. During the final session, Grace announced something that immediately caught Maya's attention. The studio offered ongoing membership for former beginner students, providing continued access to wheels and equipment for independent practice sessions. That final class carried a bittersweet atmosphere, each student sharing their favorite piece from the 6 weeks and a brief reflection on what the experience had meant to them. Frank admitted the class had given him genuine purpose during an otherwise uncertain retirement transition. Lily said pottery had become the only time during her stressful week when she felt fully present rather than anxiously thinking ahead to upcoming exams. When it was Maya's turn, she found herself surprised by how emotional she felt describing something that had started as a random, rainy day impulse. "I honestly didn't expect to care this much about something I'm still genuinely bad at," Maya admitted, laughing slightly through unexpected emotion. "But I really don't want this to just end after 6 weeks." Without hesitation, Maya signed up immediately, as did Oliver and 2 other classmates who had similarly grown attached to their weekly pottery sessions. This decision marked the beginning of Maya's transformation from casual beginner into a genuinely dedicated hobbyist, visiting the studio independently 2 or 3 evenings each week, gradually expanding her skills well beyond what the structured beginner course had initially covered. Grace continued mentoring her informally during these independent sessions, occasionally offering guidance when Maya attempted increasingly ambitious projects, larger vases, more complex glazing techniques, and eventually, decorative sculptural pieces that moved beyond purely functional pottery into genuine artistic expression. Maya began experimenting with combining different clay colors together, creating subtle marbled patterns she found genuinely beautiful, and spent considerable time researching traditional glazing techniques from various cultures, incorporating elements she found particularly striking into her own developing personal style. During these independent sessions, the studio itself became something of a sanctuary for Maya, a reliable, quiet space entirely separate from her demanding professional identity, where progress was measured not in quarterly targets but in gradually improving technique, patience, and genuine creative satisfaction. She noticed herself sleeping better on the evenings she visited the studio, her mind pleasantly occupied with the physical, tactile process rather than replaying anxious work thoughts late into the night. Around the 4th month of independent practice, Maya experienced her most significant setback yet. Attempting an ambitious, large decorative vase intended as a birthday gift for her mother, the piece cracked severely during the firing process, essentially ruining weeks of careful, dedicated work. She had spent nearly 3 weekends perfecting this particular vase, carefully shaping its tall, curved form, adding delicate carved patterns along its surface inspired by a garden her mother had once tended, and mixing a specific glaze color meant to resemble her mother's favorite shade of blue. When Grace called to inform her the vase had cracked during firing, Maya rushed to the studio immediately after work, still dressed in her office clothes, hoping desperately the damage might somehow be less severe than described. It wasn't. The vase sat on the workbench, split cleanly along one side from base to rim, unusable in its current condition. Maya felt devastated discovering the damage, having invested considerable emotional significance into this particular piece. "I don't understand what went wrong," Maya said, examining the cracked vase with genuine disappointment. "I followed every step exactly like you taught me." Grace examined the damaged piece carefully before explaining. "Sometimes pieces crack due to factors completely outside our control, uneven thickness we couldn't detect, tiny air bubbles trapped within the clay, even subtle temperature variations during firing. This isn't necessarily about doing something wrong. Sometimes it's simply an unavoidable risk of working with this particular material." Though genuinely disappointed, Maya found herself handling this setback with considerably more resilience than she might have demonstrated months earlier, remembering Grace's earlier lesson about separating her sense of personal worth from individual creative failures. She allowed herself one evening of genuine disappointment, calling her mother simply to talk rather than mentioning the ruined gift at all, before beginning an entirely new vase the following week, applying everything she had learned from this disappointing experience, eventually completing a successful replacement piece that her mother genuinely treasured upon receiving it as a birthday gift, never even learning about the failed first attempt. By the 6th month, Maya's pottery skills had developed considerably, allowing her to create genuinely beautiful, technically accomplished pieces that friends and family increasingly requested as gifts. She had made complete matching dinner sets for 2 close friends' weddings, a christening bowl for her sister's new baby, and countless individual mugs distributed generously among co-workers who admired her growing collection displayed occasionally around the office. Grace, recognizing Maya's growing dedication and improving skill level, suggested she consider participating in the studio's upcoming annual showcase, a small community event where studio members displayed and sold their pottery pieces to the general public. This particular showcase had built a modest but loyal following within the neighborhood over the years, according to Grace, regular visitors returning annually specifically to see what new work the studio's members had produced. Maya felt considerable hesitation about this suggestion, still viewing herself primarily as a beginner despite her obvious progress. "I don't think my work is good enough for something like that," she said, genuinely uncertain, glancing nervously at some of the more elaborate, professional-looking pieces created by longtime studio members displayed prominently near the entrance. "That's exactly what every single participant says before their first showcase," Grace reassured her. "Including me, many years ago. You'll never feel completely ready. At some point, you simply decide to share your work anyway." Encouraged by Grace's persistent confidence in her abilities, Maya reluctantly agreed to participate, spending the following 2 months preparing a small collection specifically for the showcase, several bowls, a set of matching mugs, and 2 decorative vases representing her most technically ambitious work to date. Preparing for the showcase brought its own unique pressures, quite different from her usual relaxed independent practice sessions. Maya found herself second-guessing every design choice, restarting pieces that seemed perfectly acceptable just weeks earlier, now suddenly feeling inadequate under the imagined scrutiny of future showcase visitors. Oliver, noticing her mounting anxiety during their shared practice sessions, reminded her gently of the exact lesson she had once needed to relearn from Grace. "You're doing the thing again," Oliver told her one evening, watching her destroy a perfectly reasonable bowl simply because one edge seemed slightly uneven. "Treating every small imperfection like some kind of personal failure. Remember what you told me, back when I was panicking about my own first wobbly mug?" Maya laughed, recognizing her own advice being reflected back at her. "I told you imperfections were part of what made handmade things special," she admitted. "Exactly," Oliver said. Maybe try believing your own advice this time. The showcase itself took place on a busy Saturday afternoon in the studio's main space, tables arranged attractively displaying each participating artist's collection. Maya arrived early, nervously arranging her pieces repeatedly, second-guessing her presentation choices until Oliver, participating alongside her with his own respectable collection, gently encouraged her to simply trust her instincts. "Your work looks genuinely professional," Oliver told her, examining her carefully arranged display. "Stop rearranging everything and just breathe for a minute." Throughout the afternoon, numerous visitors browsed the displayed pottery, several stopping specifically at Maya's table, admiring her pieces with genuine appreciation. A particularly meaningful moment occurred when an older woman purchased one of Maya's mugs, mentioning she specifically appreciated its handmade imperfections, something Maya had initially viewed as evidence of inadequate skill rather than genuine artistic character. "These little variations show it was made by actual human hands," the woman explained, admiring the slightly uneven glaze pattern. "That's exactly what makes handmade pottery special, compared to anything you'd find mass-produced in a store." Later that afternoon, a young couple furnishing their first apartment together purchased an entire set of Maya's bowls, explaining they specifically wanted to start their new home with pieces that carried genuine personal history rather than anonymous, factory-made dishware. A local restaurant owner, browsing the showcase for potential unique serving pieces, took Maya's contact information, mentioning he might reach out about a possible small commission for his restaurant's dessert menu. By the end of the showcase, Maya had sold nearly her entire collection, earning modest but genuinely meaningful income from something she had originally pursued purely for personal enjoyment and stress relief. More significantly, she experienced an overwhelming sense of validation, watching strangers genuinely appreciate and value creative work she had once doubted was worth sharing publicly at all. That evening, reflecting on the successful showcase with Grace during the studio's closing cleanup, Maya expressed genuine gratitude for everything the experience had taught her over the preceding months. "I came in here originally just looking for some kind of stress relief," Maya admitted. "I never expected to actually become genuinely good at something new, or to learn so much about handling failure differently. That's honestly the best part of teaching beginners," Grace said, smiling warmly. "Watching people discover they're capable of so much more than they initially believed, not just with clay, but generally, in how they handle difficulty and disappointment." In the months following the showcase, Maya continued developing her pottery practice, eventually setting up a small dedicated workspace within her own apartment for basic hand-building projects between her regular studio sessions. Her relationship with her demanding career also shifted subtly, the patience and resilience she had cultivated through pottery gradually influencing how she approached professional setbacks and challenges as well. Colleagues occasionally noticed handmade mugs appearing on her desk, replacing the generic office ones, small conversation starters that led to genuine connections with coworkers she had previously known only superficially. The restaurant owner from the showcase eventually followed through on his mentioned interest, commissioning Maya to create a small set of dessert bowls for his restaurant, her very first paid professional pottery commission. Though nervous accepting work with actual business expectations attached, Maya approached the project with the same patient mindset Grace had taught her, completing the commission successfully and finding herself unexpectedly proud seeing her handmade bowls actually used in a professional restaurant setting. She maintained her close friendship with Oliver, the two of them regularly attending pottery sessions together, occasionally collaborating on more ambitious combined projects, and consistently supporting each other through their individual creative struggles and successes. Frank and Lily, her original beginner classmates, also remained connected through the studio's ongoing membership community, the 6 original strangers from that first nervous class evening having gradually become a genuine, supportive creative circle within Maya's life. A year after that initial rainy Saturday walk that led her into the pottery studio almost accidentally, Maya found herself mentoring a nervous new beginner during one of Grace's classes, recognizing her own initial uncertainty reflected clearly in the newcomer's hesitant, frustrated attempts at centering clay. "It gets easier, I promise," Maya told the discouraged beginner, echoing almost exactly what Grace had once told her. "Your hands just need time to learn this feeling. Don't judge yourself too harshly for the collapsed attempts along the way." They're honestly just as important as the successful pieces. The young man she was mentoring, a nervous graduate student named Ben, looked at her skeptically. Does it ever stop feeling frustrating, though? Watching everything just collapse over and over? Maya thought about this honestly for a moment before answering. Not entirely, no. Even now, pieces still collapse sometimes, and I still feel that flash of frustration every single time. But somewhere along the way, the frustration stopped feeling like proof that I was failing, and started feeling like just part of how this particular process works. I think that shift matters more than the frustration actually disappearing completely. Ben seemed to consider this seriously, nodding slowly before returning his attention to his own wobbling piece of clay, trying again with slightly renewed patience. Reflecting occasionally on her unexpected journey, Maya often thought back to that spontaneous decision to walk into an unfamiliar pottery studio on a rainy afternoon, understanding now how significantly that single, small decision had reshaped not just her creative life, but her broader relationship with failure, patience, and genuine self-compassion. And that's the end of today's story, The Pottery Studio. I really love this story because it shows something meaningful. Sometimes the activities that teach us the most valuable life lessons have nothing to do with our actual careers or obvious responsibilities. Before you go, think about this. Is there a creative hobby you've been curious about trying, but haven't started yet? What's holding you back? Thank you so much for listening today. This has been Anna, and this is the podcast. See you in the next episode. Take care, and keep practicing your English.